good evening. Tonight's class is always a sponsor in memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. Thank you. Make a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'achol b'verach. Okay, so you know the joke of the guy who's reading his will after he passes away. He says, "And to my uncle Lou," because everyone in the family gets like a present. They get this, and this person gets my cigarette collection, and this guy gets my stamps, this guy gets my house, and this guy gets my car. And to my Uncle Lou, who said I would never mention him in my will, hello, Uncle Lou. You know? Okay, so today we're going to talk about the family relative who's in the family, but he's separate from the family. He's not really part of the family. The story of Lot. So Noah is famous, Abraham is famous. Lot is not so famous, but he still has a lot to teach us. So let's just start with understanding who he is. So if you look on your student pages, which I don't have a way of putting it onto the screen, I guess. Actually, yeah, I could show my screen. So if you look at this student sheet, I'll open it up actually in a second. So you see over here the family of Lot, right? You see over here the family of Lot. Oh, sorry. One second. Let's see if I can. No, I'm not going to bother. Anyway, if you look over here, you'll see the family of Avraham. So you have Terach as the father. Put up here on the screen. So Terach is the father, and Terach has three sons. One son is Nachar, one son is Haran, and one son is Avraham. Now, Haran, the brother of Avraham, has three children. One is called Lot, the guy we're going to talk about today. One is called Sarah, the lady we're going to talk about next week. And that's right. And the other one, I think, is next week. And the third is Milcah, who's not really much of a famous biblical character. And so these are our three characters that we have over here on, that we have the three children of Haran. Okay? Nachar has a lot of children. They're not relevant to our story. We only need to know about Nachar because he's going to have a son called Besuel. Actually, Milcah marries Nachar. So Milcah is going to be the sister of Sarah, is going to be the mother of Rebecca, of Rivka. And one day we'll talk about Rivka when we get to there. Just as you see on the family chart, if you're looking at the family chart, you see there's Rivka. She's a granddaughter of the oldest son of Nachar. But what we're going to focus on today is the family of Haran. Haran is a person who is killed by Nimrod. How is he killed? How is the father of Lot and Sarah killed? When Avram was threatened by Nimrod that he needs to bow down before him, he's going to be thrown into a fiery furnace, Avram said, "You can kill me. I'm not going to bow to anyone besides for God." So his brother, Avram's brother, was watching on the sidelines. Now in his heart, he agreed with Avram. He understood the truth of what Avram was teaching, and in his heart, he believed in the belief of one God. But he was afraid. So he's saying, "Let's see what happens to Avram. If Avram comes out of the miracle happens for him, he's saved from the fire, I'm also going to publicly declare my allegiance to Avraham. And if he doesn't, then I'll shash still, I'll keep it quiet." What happens? Avram comes out of the fire alive. So his brother Haran says, "I too believe in the God of Avraham," and he was thrown into the fiery furnace. But because he had been waiting for a miracle to happen, no miracle happened for him. And he was killed in the fire. Perhaps the first victim of religious fanaticism and religious extremism is right here, Haran, the father of Sarah and the father of Lot. So Lot is now a young man. I don't know exactly how old he is at the time that his father is killed. Doesn't say. But he's a young man. And he is adopted by his uncle, Avraham, who also marries his sister, Sarah, his sister. So Lot ends up moving in with his sister, Sarah, and his uncle, who is also his brother-in-law, Avraham. And the ladies are shaking their heads. Sounds like a soap opera. Terach. Terach has three sons. If you look at the thing, Terach has 3 kids. Okay, it was a small family back then, and they wanted to keep it in the family. So this is now we know who he is, right? We just have to know who he is in like the part of Jewish. When you meet someone, you gotta who's your buddy, who's your sister, who's your mother-in-law. Oh, I can't figure it out, right? Jewish geography. So we gotta know who he is. So here is the family chart, and now we know exactly where he falls into the family picture. If you can see, for those who are watching online, here it is. Okay. Now, when Abraham leaves Ur Kasdim and travels first to Haran, not to be confused with Haran, a place called Haran. Places are also similar. Lot travels together with his uncle and his sister and his grandfather. They all travel together. When God appears to Avram and says, Lech Lecha, travel forth to the land that I will show you, Lot continues to journey into the unknown future wherever God will send them. Lot travels together with Abraham and Sarah. And as a result of hanging out with his uncle, guess what happens to him? What happens when you hang out with your rich uncle? You get wealthy. Very good. You get rich. In fact, the Talmud uses as an example, the Talmud asks, what is the biblical source for the idea that if you hang out with the rich, you also will become rich? So the Talmud brings a source from Lot. Lot wasn't wealthy, but he hung out with Avram, and Avram became very wealthy because of Paro and all that. But because he hung out with his rich uncle, he also became wealthy. So Lot becomes very, very wealthy. Now, what happens when he becomes wealthy? Corrupt. He becomes, before there's one step, you're right, but you're missing one step in between. There's wealthy, and before the wealthy becomes corrupt, there's one stage in between. Yeah, selfish.
Not humble.
Greedy. Not humble also, yeah. That's the step to bring you to corruption. There's a greedy, and then there's corrupt. That's the order, usually. I mean, some people are very good at doing it all at once, but I'm saying usually there's a progression of how we get to the corruption. So Lot, who has now become wealthy, becomes greedy, and he starts to want more. And we see that the Torah describes a battle or an argument, a dispute between the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Abraham. No, of Abraham. What's the debate? What's the argument? Abraham was very, very righteous, and Abraham refused to allow his sheep to shepherd or his cattle to take from any of the grass of any other lands that weren't theirs. So when they were traveling, hello Nafar. So when they were traveling, they would travel with the sheep and the cattle muzzled. They wouldn't eat any grass that wasn't supposed to be theirs. Lot felt, I can do whatever I want. Right? When you're rich, you become greedy. So then I can take whatever I want and do as I wish. So he would let his cattle graze from anyone's fields, even though that is stealing. Now, when Avram shepherd said to Lot's shepherds, you can't do that, that's stealing. So what does Lot answer? He said, not, who cares? He has a logical, when corruption is also, there you go. There's always a logical argument. Every corrupt politician or a person always has a justification for their corruption, right? This is a justification. What's his justification? I mentioned the will in the beginning of the class. Lot says, or Lot's shepherds say, and then Lot later says this to Avram directly, because this escalates to Avram and to Lot. If you look in the verses, I'm not going to get technical. Lot himself says to Avraham, God promises you the land of Israel. So this land will one day be yours. But you have no children. And since you have no children, who will inherit you? Me. So therefore, one day this land will be mine. So I'm already, taking an advance on the property that will one day be mine. And therefore, since it will eventually be my land, I'm allowed to take my cattle can graze in other people's fields, even though we don't have permission to do so. Now, Avram was very, very pained by this. First of all, it was wrong. It was immoral. Can't steal. Secondly, more than just that it was wrong, if you go look into the psychology here a little bit, Avram is on the mission to inspire and to convert and to educate all of the people of the land in proper conduct and how to behave like a moral, ethical Jew. How to believe in God, how to be righteous, how to have trust, how to not steal, how to be an ethical human being. And here's his nephew who's stealing. Doesn't work right, you know what I'm saying? It's not right. It's counterproductive. It's not even the right word. It would be bad for Avraham as he's trying to inspire people to be better and to be more righteous and to be more trusting in God, to have a nephew who's busy stealing from everyone around and couldn't care less and behaving like the spoiled brat is going to inherit one day, and I don't need to describe that kind of a kid. Yeah, but it's true you're born with a certain nature, but why should Avram encourage that? Well, it's his nephew hanging around with him. So Avram is worried. What? When he has no choice?
Because he was the brother of his wife, so he tried to be kind enough.
Well, that's what they were living together, but Avram does have a choice. So Avram says to his nephew, it's not going to work for the two of us to live together anymore. First of all, they were both wealthy, a lot of cattle, but the way you're living your life and the style that you're behaving in doesn't fit for what I'm trying to accomplish, and it's time for us to part ways. Now, really, Lot should have said, no, let's stay together, and I love you, and all that, let's make it work, right? But instead, what does Lot say? Great idea. I like the idea. We'll discuss in a minute. So what does Avram say to his nephew? You choose. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And what does Lot choose? So the Torah says that Lot lifts up his eyes and he looks and he sees the valley of the plain of the Jordan River, and he sees it was a very rich, irrigated place, it was a very wealthy land, and he decides to move to the city of Sodom. Okay. Why does he choose Sodom? So first of all, it was a very wealthy land. That's first of all. But before I can explain to you why he chooses Sodom, we need to understand more of the culture of the city of Sodom. And then we'll get into why Lot made the choice he made to move there. So if you look at text number 1, which is from chapter 13, verse number 13, from this week's Torah reading, says the Torah... Oh, there's no, the gray boxes didn't print. Okay, whatever. The people of Sodom were very evil and sinful against the Lord. That's what it says in the verse. What does it mean that they were evil? Says Rashi, they were evil with their bodies. What does it mean they were sinful? They were sinful with their money. And they were sinful against God very much. What do you mean they were very sinful against God? The word in Hebrew, ma'od, that they were very sinful means not just were they evil with their bodies, they behaved immorally, not just were they evil with their money, but they knew their master, they knew about God, and they deliberately intended to rebel against him. This is a pretty harsh description of a city. Evil in every aspect you can imagine.
So they were evil when he went there?
Yeah. He didn't make them evil, they were evil. Sodom there was 5 cities. Referred to as Sodom and Gomorrah. But Sodom was the biggest of all the 5 cities, and Sodom was a very, very wealthy place, but a very wicked place. An evil place, a sinful place that sinned against God. Bim'od very much. So, before I tell you why we go there, let's explain a few things of the culture there. As I said, they were a very wealthy city. It was tremendous resources. Things grew very quickly, but instead of being grateful or gratitude to Hashem for the wealth that they had been given, as Marsha said, before corruption is another stage, which is one is greedy. Also, a lack of humility, right? Well, you begin to think, look at me, look what I accomplished. So the people of Sodom, instead of being thankful to God for what they had, instead they became very selfish and greedy and full of themselves, and therefore they became cruel and decided they didn't want to share their wealth with anybody else. I'm going to share with you a few different things from the Medrash about the evil, sadistic wickedness of the people of Sodom. First of all, everything that they did evil, they did it within their own legal system. So it wasn't that they had a legal system and they were wicked. Their legal system was designed in a way to uphold their wickedness. Their judges were wicked, their laws were wicked. They did not, by law, visitors were forbidden to sleep overnight in the city of Sodom. You weren't allowed to sleep there. No homeless people, no people were allowed to stay, even visitors. They didn't rent out places for people to stay because they didn't want anyone coming and taking money from them. There was a law that if visitors came to the town, the judges would find ways to make them leave penniless. And it brings a whole story in the Medrash of a guy came with a large carpet and they stole it from him. And then they said, we interpreted your dream. And they chased him out of the town. Many stories like that. In fact, feeding strangers in the city carried with it a death sentence. Death sentence. It was illegal, punishable by death, to feed strangers, because then you're going to welcome all of these, low-life people to come hang out in the city of Sidon. They pruned all the trees in the city, were pruned to have no fruit, that even animals and birds shouldn't come and eat from the fruit of the trees without, paying for it, and having, even the animals shouldn't have benefit from the city. The Medrash brings the story of Eliezer, the servant of Avram, who once was traveling and it got dark and he had no choice, he had to stay there. And of course, they didn't allow him to sleep there. So they tried to chase him out of town. There was a guy who beat him. Someone robbed him, and then he wanted the place to sleep. The guy took his money. When he wanted it back, the guy began to beat him, and he bled. So Eliezer takes the guy to court. He beat him until he was bleeding. So he comes to court, and the judge hears the case, and you know what the judge says? The fact that this guy beat you till you bled, it's good. It's a form of medicine. When the person was sick, they would suck the blood to pull any infection or illness that was in the blood. So it's a form of medicine. You, he tells Eliezer, you owe him money for doing bloodletting on you, for doing a medical procedure on you. You owe him money. Before you can leave town, you can't leave till you pay him. So Eliezer was a very, very smart man. What did he do? You know what he did, the Medrash says? He went and he beat the judge till the judge started to bleed. He said to the judge, now you owe me money for bloodletting. I'll tell you what, you can pay him directly and everything is good. So he left the, You have a question?
Yeah.
So then he leaves the court. He's now very hungry from all that action. There's no one who will give you food. There was no places to go get food. So he saw there was a wedding going on. Now, if you invite someone to a wedding, it's punishable by death. So what happens? He comes into the wedding. He sits down by a table. People look at him. And he sat down next to Alejandro and says, thank you for inviting me to the party. So right away, Alejandro ran out of the room. He was afraid people would hear that. And they would think he invited a stranger to eat. They would kill him. And he went from table to table, saying to people, yeah, he's the one that invited me. Thank you for inviting me to the wedding. And the guy here, they would run out. So everyone ran out. He sat down and he ate all the food by himself. And then they wanted to put him into the bed. So Sdom had a bed. And any visitors that came that stayed overnight, they would tell me you have to sleep on this bed. How do they design this bed? That if you were short, they would tie you from one end of the bed and stretch you, like on the Inquisition on a rack, they would stretch you to the other side of the bed. If you were too tall for the bed, they had a tall guy, they'll give him a small bed. So, you're too tall for the bed, we'll chop off your legs to make you fit onto the bed. This was the kind of city that it was. But they always justify what they did. So, for example, someone put out bricks, they would make bricks to dry, and it says, each person would come and just take one brick. Put out peas to dry. Everyone would come and just take one pea. So I didn't take it. I just took one piece. I just took one brick. Meantime, the guy came back a few hours later. He'd been wiped out clean, but everyone took one piece. That was the culture of the city of Stone, where everyone was backstabbing each other. There was absolutely no loyalty, no friendship. It was a very, very evil place where everyone was constantly looking for ways to hurt and to do evil to others with their money.
I don't want to live in
Yeah, it's okay. And the same is with their bodies. They were very, very wicked and evil with their bodies as well. The worst story, the final straw, it says in the Torah, the cries of the people of the city came before God. It's a very, very sad story. That there was a homeless man, a beggar, that came to town. Now, Lot had a daughter. He had 5 daughters. He had one daughter was called Plotis. That was her name. And she saw this unfortunate beggar was there in the city, and no one was feeding him. He was dying of hunger. It was illegal to feed him. So she felt very bad. So when she went out to the well to go get water, she secretly left some food in the bushes from him. She secretly left food for him. She told him, gave him a signal where he could find the food. And every day when she would go to get water, she would secretly leave food for this beggar. So people began to get suspicious. How is this beggar still living? 2-3 weeks, he's still alive. Someone must be feeding him. It's repetitiously that he's still alive. So they began to surveillance on the beggar to see who dare defy the laws of their civilized, elevated culture where they didn't allow beggars and homeless people in. And they saw that who was only feeding this person, daughter of Lot Plotis. The Gemara and the Medrash have two different versions of what happened. The Medrash says that she was taken and burnt alive. Burnt alive. They tied her to a stake, alive, and lit fire, and she was burnt alive for the sin of having fed this person. The Medrash, they said the Gemara in Sanhedrin says a worse end to her. They stripped her naked, they covered her entire body in honey, and left her on the rooftop until all the bees came, and the bees stung her to death. That was their punishment to this girl for feeding a stranger. Okay? A horrific city. Horrific city. Now I'll take a question. You got a question? No. The end. Okay. So now we come to the question, why did Lot choose to move to such a place? This was a wicked, and people knew about it. It wasn't like Lot didn't know who, Shay did some research before he went online, searched on the reviews, it must be something like, whatever they had back then, I don't know, trip next door reviews. Yeah. He destroys the city. This is the city still is destroyed by God. He destroys the city. But the question is, why would Lot move there?
He thought he could pay off everybody. Is that it? The greedy pay off everybody, get what he wanted or something?
So the first reason is, what? Okay, but he hung out with Avram. We'll see, he wasn't so evil.
He felt like they made him look good.
Okay, that's true.
Didn't want anything to do with Avram's teachings anymore. He was done.
Okay, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. Let's first look at verse number 10. Okay, so if we take back the papers, the second thing, we got to do the sharing of the screen. But anyway, verse number 10, if you're following along, is chapter 13, verse 10. Why does Lot move there, says the Torah? A simple reason. And Lot raised his eyes, and he saw the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was entirely watered. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it was like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, Boa Chatzar, as you come to Zohar. Meaning, simply, it was a very, very rich land. So, it's very easy to overlook the spiritual imperfections, or it's more than perfection, but to overlook the spiritual flaws of the place, to make a living. It's work. I got to go there for work. You know what I'm saying? I know a couple, they're not married anymore. But the guy who was in marketing, he sold market ads, whatever. And he convinced his wife, that in order to market, where does he market? He has to go to the bars, because he has clients there. So every night he was out clubbing. He told his wife, this is years ago, whatever, he told his wife, I have to go, I have clients that go to the club, so I meet clients, and it's business. So that's what he argued. Anyway, you understand? So it's business. So I got to move, leave notes, whatever. Says Rashi, what does Atzar mean? Well, simply, it's the name of a place. But the Medrash Haggadah interprets it unfavorably. It was because they were lascivious, if I pronounce that correctly. They were immoral. In Hebrew, they were shitufei zimah. They were sexually depraved in simple English. And that's why Lot chose their region for himself. So it wasn't just that it was a wealthy land with a lot of business opportunities. It was a city. There was a nightlife. There were clubs. There were bars. There was, whatever other parties go on. There was stuff happening there.
Vegas.
It was Vegas. It was Vegas. Exactly. Yeah. So this is the simple reason why Lot moves there. Firstly, because he went for the business. And by the way, that we all can relate to, right? We all know people who move somewhere. But I can't go to shul. Why not? I got to go to work. I got to make a living. Or I got to go to this event on Shabbos on Friday night. I got to do this because it's work. So we all, if we don't do it ourselves, we know many, many people that give up on our own spiritual standards and morals and values because of business. So it's not so far-fetched to understand why Lot moved to a wicked place, because it was business opportunity there. It's also not so far-fetched to understand why he would move somewhere which is fun. He was a young guy, and I don't know how old he was, but the Torah doesn't say anywhere his age. But there was a lot of action. Living with Avram probably got a little bit boring. It's like living in Coral Springs. Not much happens after 9 p.m. And you wanted to go to Manhattan. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of stuff can happen there. I don't even know everything that happens. Thank God I don't know everything that happens. I'm sure it's a lot. And we wanted to enjoy life. We wanted to enjoy it. You understand? Okay. Truth is that there's another reason why he moved to Stone. There's another reason why he moved to Stone. If you look at the very next verse, verse number 11, you have to turn your page over, but it's the very next verse in the Torah. So still chapter 13, but now the next verse says the Torah, and Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan. And he traveled, it says in Hebrew, Vayisa Lot Mikedem. Lot traveled from the east, and they parted from one another. So what does it mean, traveled from Mikedem, from the east? So simply, what does it mean? He traveled from where Avram was and went from the east heading westward. That's simply what it means. So if they were together, he went to the west, meaning from the east. However, according to the Medrash Agada, what does the Medrash tell us? What does it mean he traveled? Why is the Torah telling us he traveled from the east? We know where Avram and Lot were. The word Mikadem is from Mikadmono Shel Olam. He traveled from the ancient one, from the originator of the universe. One of the ways of describing God as Kadmono Shel Olam, the beginning of all, the beginning of the world. And he said to himself, I care neither for Avram nor for his God. The Torah is telling us that when Lot made a decision to move to Sodom, you know what Lot was really doing? He was running away from his religious uncle. Can you imagine? His uncle was religious, hardcore, no stealing from other people, no taking their grass. You got to pray and bench after every meal. You got to say a blessing and whatever else, Avram, circumcision and all this stuff. And finally, Lot says, it's time to run free. So we would say in the language today, in the world, in the religious world today, he went off the derech. He went off the derech. He went off the path. He fried out. Fried out. In Yiddish, we say someone fried out means they became free. He gave it all away. He says, I don't need Avram. I don't need his God. I don't need religion. I'm going to go to Manhattan. I'm going to go to Sodom. I'm going to go party. I'm going to make money. I'm going to be rich. And my life is going to be wonderful. You know what it sounds like? A lot of Americans I know. A lot. I'm going to make money. I'm going to enjoy life. And I don't need God. I don't need religion. Yeah, I'll go for the holidays, whatever. I don't need it. Oh, culture. I'll go. My life is good. Yeah, we can relate. Lot is not some far-fetched character. I'm saying this is, yeah.
I'm just curious. You mentioned he had daughters. At this time when he left, did he have his daughters already when he went? Or that happened?
Yeah, I imagine I guess he had some daughters. I mean, he was in Israel for a number of years. I'm going to imagine he already had daughters already when he traveled there, because I'm not even sure exactly. It was after. No, it happens earlier on. So I'm not sure. When he travels to Sodom, I don't know if he had daughters. In fact, I'm learning with, we were trying to find if Lot's wife, her name was Iris, if she was a girl from Irit, I think. If she was a girl from Sodom or if she was from Israel, I couldn't find anything about when he got married or anything like that. So, okay. Anyway, we all know a lot of stories of people that came from the old country or already born here, but they're their parents or whatever from the old country, and they came to the Golden Medina, right? They came to America, the land of the free, and I'm not against whatever. In order to survive, in order to make a living in America, you got to work on Saturday, and you got to keep up with the Joneses, and you got to go to these parties, into these restaurants, into these events. And you got to dress a certain way, and you got to send your kids to certain schools, etc., etc., etc. And next thing you know, you're deep, deep into stuff. Yeah?
Can you still be religious and go to Australia?
You could still be religious, but here we're seeing that not only was he looking for, not only was Lot looking, at first, number 10 tells us he moved to Sodom because it was a rich place, and because it was a fun party place. But verse 11 is hinting to us he left from the east. He left, it was an act of freedom from the one that created the world. An act of freedom from God. An act of, I'm a free man. And we don't need to spend any more time explaining it. We all can understand exactly how we living in America today, in many ways, maybe today we're not as wicked as Sodom, maybe not, we can debate it, but definitely the idea of giving up on our religious background, on our upbringing, on the values we grew up with, in order to be successful and live the American lifestyle, live the American dream, and party the American party, and to have and eventually have American values and that the American, whatever the cultural or societal norms of the day are, become our barometer of right and wrong, of what's evil, what's pure, what's good. All that we can relate to.
Yeah, but it's a little different, I think, because at the time the term God and Judaism was relatively new.
Okay.
It's not like today. They didn't have ancestors that go
But his uncle.
way back that kept Shabbat and he was breaking the link.
It's true. It's not ancestors, but he was raised with his uncle. First of all, his father also believed in God. His father died for this.
Okay.
His father died in belief in one God. His uncle.
It was still new. Even the people who came out of Egypt.
And therefore what?
Did the so you know, it kind of it seems unnatural to me.
Okay.
That he would.
I hear. Naturally, you will leave behind Avram. We think of Avram inspiring the world. He left it behind. And Avram took good care of him. And Avram took good care of him. Avram took good care of his nephew. He made him wealthy. He took care of him. And it wasn't an act of defiance against Avram. The Torah is telling us it was an act of defiance against God. He liked his uncle. He wasn't against Avram per se. He just wanted the freedom of Sodom. Very kind.
I didn't grow up religious, but I grew up in Aventura. Before it was called Aventura. And I went to Hillel, and all my friends were Jewish. And I rebelled. I said, this is not the real world. And I ran from God.
Right.
And I said, let me go to the most Goyish school I can go. And I went to University of South Florida by myself. And it was a party school back then. It was called University of Sun and Fun. And all kinds of Sodom things went on.
Right.
So it's you said it very well. I can totally relate to today's world very easily.
Very easy
to everybody.
Yeah. This is the story of Lot is an American story. It's a story of about 70 years ago, whatever. All the Jews came from the old country and gave him Shabbos and gave him many things in order to make it in America. And today too, we have kids that grow up, or many of us sitting in the room, perhaps we know ourselves or others, and we gave it up for our own success, for money, for pleasure, for a girl, for fun, etc. Sounds like a pretty bad story so far. Lot is off the derech, which means he went off the path of being a righteous Jew. He's not connected to God. He's living a hedonistic, materialistic lifestyle in Sodom. Sounds like a bad story. However, the story does not end there. The story does not end there. What happens next? So a few years go by. How many years go by? I can say figure it out, but whatever. Some years go by. And God decides to destroy the city of Sodom. And God sends two angels to the city. The two angels come to the city the night after they had visited Yaakov. The night after they visited Avram and Sarah. Which we had this morning after davening today. We talked about they come, the three guests, and they eat the food, and they say they're going to have a child, and Sarah laughs. Remember that story? So after that, they go to Sodom. Two of them. The third one went back to heaven. Because they had done, one came to share the news of a child being born, that one back to heaven. But the other two angels come to the city. One comes to destroy the city, one comes to save Lot. They come to the city to save Lot and his family. Avram prayed to save Lot and his family. So what happens? They come to the city of Sodom. And what happens when they arrive in the city? Let's read inside chapter 19. So now we're skipping a few chapters. We're in chapter 19. Also this week's Torah reading. Chapter 19, verse number 2. And the Torah says as follows, I'll read it out loud. And he said, so he sees these men come. Lot approaches them, he bows down to them. And he said, behold now, my lords, please turn to your servant's house and stay overnight and wash your feet, and you shall arise early and go on your way. And they said, no, but we will stay overnight in the street. Verse number 3, and they urged them strongly, and they turned into him. We'll go back to those words. They turned into him and came into his house, and he made them a feast, and he baked unleavened cakes, and they ate. Okay, here's the story in the text. He sees these strangers. It's actually the night of Pesach. That's when the angels came to Abraham. And the night that Yitzchak is born is the night of Pesach. So it's the night of the Seder. He makes matzos. If you read the Hebrew, he made matzos off of Yochelu, the night of eating matzah. He makes matzah. He's looking for some guests for his Pesach Seder. He sees these two strangers. He says, it's dangerous for you to be out overnight. People are not allowed to sleep on the street overnight. No one's going to take care of you. Please let me protect you. Let me take care of you. Come to my home. I'll feed you early in the morning before anyone even knows you were here. You'll leave before anyone knows.
But you said before that they're not allowed to host any.
He wasn't allowed. It was dangerous. And because it was dangerous, I want you to see what Rashi says on verse number 2 and on verse number 3. Rashi tells us that when he asks these angels to suruna, to please turn to my house, normally you don't say please turn to my house. You say come to my home, right? Come. What is please turn? So Rashi tells us he was worried. Even though he's inviting them into his home, he knows that it's dangerous to invite guests into your home. It's against the law. It's illegal, punishable by death. So he says to them, please turn, take a circuitous path to my home. Take a long roundabout way. Don't go straight to my home. When people see you walking, they won't know where you're going. And that they should not recognize that you're entering there. That is why it says turn. And in fact, verse number 3, what does it say that the angels did? He urged them strongly. And they turned into him. What do you mean they turned into him? Rashi tells us they took a circuitous path. They took a roundabout path towards his house. Meaning as follows. There's something very amazing in these words, in these Rashis. Lot, this wicked guy that has rebelled against his uncle, renounced his commitment to Judaism, gone after the money and after the pleasures and seemingly gave up on his Judaism. He's not just inviting guests for the Pesach Seder. He's risking his life. He's literally risking his life in order to invite guests to his home. He's risking his life. He knows it's dangerous to have guests. He clearly tells them, you can't come to my home straight. They'll see. And we'll all get in trouble. So go a roundabout. And they came this way and that way. They didn't come straight. So why did he do it? If Lot became part of the society in which he moved to, and by the way, Lot very much integrated into the society. Lot became one of the ministers, became a judge in the city. He became not just a regular. When Jews move to a place, they don't just assimilate. They they assimilate good. We become the creme de la creme of the non-Jewish environment. Right? We can't just move to any. We have to prove that we're the best of all the non-Jews that we're trying to be like.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did Lot know they were Jewish?
He didn't know they were Jewish, but he saw that they were strangers. That they weren't Jewish. They were angels.
But, right. He was bringing them for the Seder.
And that's no one was Jewish per se. Judaism wasn't, as we mentioned before, it wasn't a religion like there were people like, oh, your mother's Jewish, you're not Jewish. It wasn't like that then. Before the giving of the Torah. To come have a meal. He was inviting them.
Was he inviting them because it was Passover?
He was inviting them because it was Passover, and someone asked on Facebook, it was a very good question that was asked, how could they be invited to a Pesach Seder if there's no exodus from Egypt yet? So we know, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. How do we know that there was Pesach? There was no exodus yet. The story of Egypt didn't happen yet. So we already have other examples of Avram celebrating Pesach before the Jews left Egypt. When Lot was kidnapped also, and then Og came to him, etc. Avram kept the entire Torah, even though it had not been given. Avram kept the whole Torah. How did Avram know the whole Torah? That's a very good question, and without getting too distracted, but in like 30 seconds, Avram was a very, very spiritually in tuned human being. He was able to understand the spiritual dynamics and spiritual nature of the universe. And the mitzvahs are not just random acts that God chose. I want you to celebrate. Do that instead. Every mitzvah is a reflection of a certain aspect of existence, of the universe. We don't always see what our mitzvah is doing because we don't have that spiritual awareness. But Avram had it. As I said. Oh, well, Phil was talking back to me, huh? So Abraham was very, very spiritually in tune, and he knew that this day, the 15th of Nisan, is a very, very spiritually powerful day, which it is. Throughout all of history, it's been a very, very special day, special energy. And so he knew that on this day, there's a energy and the need and the spiritual dimension of eating matzah on this day. And he had the guests on this day, many stories of this day. So his nephew is continuing the tradition. And his nephew is making a Pesach Seder. Second night of Pesach, there's another discussion, but whatever. He's making a Pesach Seder. And he's making matzah. The Torah class is making matzah. And he's inviting them over to come and celebrate, to feel, you have to have guests. What's Pesach without guests? His uncle never had Pesach without guests. Right? So he's inviting guests. He finds some people that he can tell them that there's a God, there's a spiritual energy to tonight, it's a holy day, God runs the world, etc., etc.
So deep down inside, his
Yes.
neshama is really...
Yeah, well, so I was skipping the show. I'll ask you a simple question. So why did he do it? Why was Lot, who had integrated to society, perhaps he had married a Stomite girl, I'm not sure. I was trying to find the source to which it came from, but definitely he had become a judge of the city. So he wasn't just a regular person living there. He was he was part of Stone. He was a respected member of the community. And he's willing to risk his respect. He's willing to risk his position, willing to risk everything. He's worked so hard to build up his prestige and his, connections in this community. He's willing to risk it all. He's willing to risk his life, which is, by the way, what happens at the end of the story is that, just so you quickly, I'll go ahead for a minute, his wife was not so happy he invited home guests. So what did she do? She started going around to the neighbors. Can I borrow salt? We don't need salt. When my husband brought home guests, I need salt for the guests. Word got around that they needed salt for the guests, and a mob came outside the home of Lot, and they almost broke down the door. So give us your guests. We want to have fun with them. So I said before, they were wicked with their bodies. They didn't want to, teach them math. They wanted to have fun with them in other ways. And Lot came outside and he begged them not to, and without getting distracted, he offered them his daughters, but let's not get distracted, and because it's a distraction, and and then they're about to kill Lot, and then the angels do a miracle, and the people by the front of the door become blind. The angels open the door, they strike the people, the mob, it's about to kill Lot and break down the home and attack them all. They strike them with blindness so they can't find the door. They pull Lot inside, say, now you know that the city is wicked, let's escape. God's destroying the city tonight. Okay? So Lot, in fact, is not wrong for being worried about people seeing him bringing visitors to his home. If not for the angel saving his life, he would have been killed. And yet Lot is literally risking his life the same way as a father risked his life and got thrown into the fiery furnace for his belief in God. Lot wouldn't do that. But to have guests for the Pesach Seder, 2 random strangers he found floating around on the street in the middle of the night, that he's willing to do. Why? Why does Lot do that? You know why Lot is willing to risk his life to have guests in his home on Pesach night? Because he learned it from Avram. Not the religious classes that he heard Avram teaching and preaching and giving everyone inspirational speeches about one God. What Lot learned was the example of what he saw. Meaning the hospitality that he had seen Avram doing. And the care and the generosity and the concern and the dedication to which Avram and Sarah took care of their guests. They ran to feed them the best food, the best hospitality they could give. What he saw, that stayed with Lot forever. Even living in Stone, he still remembers that hospitality that he saw from his uncle and from his sister, and he keeps that with him forever. In Hebrew, that's called the Dugma Chaya. No, having guests. I was saying, yes, he saw the hospitality of his sister, and he internalized. But in Hebrew, we call this way of teaching. There's different ways of teaching. There's frontal teaching. There's auditory teaching. There's the most effective method of teaching is it's called a dugma chaya. A dugma chaya means a living example. You can give a theoretical example. So you don't understand the concept. I'll give you an example. When you play music, whatever. But then there's a living example. What's a living example? It's an example that's not being taught. It's not being said. It's not being presented. It's being lived. And that example that we teach by our actions, not by our speeches, not by our classes, but where we live, that stays with Lot forever. 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 So you can tell your kids everything from today till tomorrow. And you can tell them do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. But you know what they're going to do? Not what they saw you telling them to do, but what they saw you doing. They saw you doing. I remember the source. Someone was telling his kid the whole davening. A guy wasn't praying, but kept telling his kid to pray. So the rabbi tells him, you should know that when your kid grows up, he's going to learn to daven just like you. Which means he won't pray. He'll tell his kid, daven, 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 and he won't daven. He won't pray. Tell his kid to pray. We can pretend and we can convince ourselves that we're teaching them good things and we're telling them good things and we're trying to tell them to do the right thing. What will our kids take? What they see. What they see us do. In Hebrew, that's called a dugma chaya, a living example. Avram gave a lot of beautiful classes. Avram was very inspiring. Avram was a wonderful person. But at some point, Lot said, I had enough of all the religion and all the theology and all the teachings. But that which he had seen with his eyes, that which he had seen Avram and Sarah doing, that was so ingrained within him, he was willing to risk his life for it. He couldn't imagine not doing it. To him, to sit Pesach Seder without having guests was unthinkable. I'm willing to risk my life to have guests. Why? Because that's how I grew up. That's how I grew up. So, if you think about this, here's a whole new dimension to Lot. How many of us do certain things today, not because we were taught to do them, not because someone told us to do them, but because we grew up seeing them being done. And we grew up seeing this example. We grew up living a certain way, being in a certain environment, seeing our parents, those that we respect and admire, behaving a certain way, that became the way that we know them. Our values, our standards, our barometer of right and wrong, not from what we were told, from what we saw.
I have an example.
Yeah.
I tell my kids all the time, one day I'm going to be old and then, the way we grew up, we take care of our parents and grandparents and this and that. And they say, don't worry, Mom, we're going to take care of you. And so I know, and they continue to tell me that just in case I stay alone or something, I will go to this house and to this, my daughter.
Right.
And before she got married, she told her husband, just to let you know, my mother will come to live.
Beautiful.
So this is something that exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So if we tell our kids you got to respect your elders, but we don't take the time to call them to respect and all that, then it's not going to work. But if we do it, you don't need to tell your kids to respect your elders. If you take care of your parents, I see with my parents, when they take care of their parents, tremendous. It's ingrained in you. It's ingrained in you. No one has to tell me to do this. Because it's not something I'm being formally taught, it's something that I'm seeing. And what you see is forever. I want to read you a poem. You want to hear a beautiful poem? It's fairly famous. It's not like some of you have heard it before, but it's still beautiful and it's very apropos. Poem goes like this. When you thought I wasn't looking, you heard this? I saw you hang my first painting on the refrigerator, and I wanted to paint another one. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you feed a stray cat, and I thought it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make my favorite cake for me, and I knew that little things are special things. When you thought I wasn't looking, I heard you say a prayer, and I believed that there was a God to talk to. When you thought I wasn't looking, I felt you kiss me goodnight, and I felt loved. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, And I learned that sometimes things hurt, but it's all right to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw that you cared, and I wanted to be everything that I could be. When you thought I wasn't looking, I looked. I wanted to say thanks for all the things I saw when you thought I wasn't looking. Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful. So, who is Lot today? Who is Lot today? He's not just a hedonistic guy looking for money and pleasure and all that. You know who Lot is today? Every one of us that has certain values in our life and certain behaviors that are ingrained within us and certain absolutes in our right or wrong and certain absolutes in the way we behave and interact with others. And the reason why we have these core parts of our identity is because of what we saw when we grew up, from the living examples that we saw. That's us. That's love. And we have the job of, in turn, being living role models to our children as well. Understand? That's the story of Lot. I don't know, it just came to my head now. That's the story. What? So in the end, how does the story of Lot end? So the story of Lot ends that eventually they escape from the city of Sodom, and they with the angels, and they come to the caves, and they think the whole world is destroyed. So Lot has two sons together with his two daughters, Ammon and Moab. From each one of his daughters have a child with him while he's drunk, and they became two more nations. And eventually Mashiach comes from that, but that's another class for another night.
Turns into a cooler song.
Yes.
She
It
said,
turns back.
is that because she
So, God willing,
make her soft because she was asking for the song?
so we're talking, God willing, we'll do this again next year. And then we'll get to some of the lesser known people. And then we can talk about Iris and the idea of looking back and not being able to let go. I'll spend 1 minute, since we have 5 minutes. We'll talk about her name was Irit, or Irit, for 5 minutes, okay? Irit was his wife. So what happened? They're running away from the city. I'll tell you one quick story. I'll talk about Irit. This popped in my head now. There was a chassid, Shmuel Levittin, whatever, that he lived in the 770s. His whole family was killed in the war. He was the only one from his family who escaped 770. He was a very older, esteemed chassid, and he lived in 770. He had a small little office in 770. They just popped in my head down the story. So one day there was a yeshiva, so he came to the Rebbe in Yechidus in a meeting, and the Rebbe told the student that he should live together with this Shmuel Levittin for a few days. Shmuel had an office in 770. He lived, slept, ate everything in 770. He had an office there. That was his bedroom. That was his house. He ate Shabbos upstairs in the previous Rebbe's apartment. She lived. So I don't remember if the Rebbe said to him then, or he said afterwards, it would be good for an American boy to see how a chassid doesn't get into pajamas to go to sleep. This man learned all day and all night. When he got tired, he laid down and went to sleep. American boy, you have to get into pajamas and brush your teeth, and he has a whole bedtime ritual. It would be good for him to see how there's someone that doesn't get into pajamas to go to sleep. They don't feel not so serious about the bedtime. Just sometimes the greatest lessons in life can't be taught. The lessons that we see. Anyway, that's the importance of what we see and how we are who we are because of what we saw, and how if we want to inspire others and to teach others, it's not about what we say, but the way we behave. Now, let's talk about Iris for 5 minutes. So Iris, they're running away from the city of Sodom. So basically, very quickly, Lot had 4 daughters. One had already been killed, but he had 4 living daughters. 2 were married, and 2 were engaged. So the 2 that were married were not living at home. So Lot sends messengers to his daughters. We need to escape. The city is going to be destroyed. And his son-in-law is laughing at him. Funny, the city is destroyed. We're not going anywhere. And they can't convince them to leave. They stay behind with their husbands and they die. The 2 younger daughters that are not yet married are still living at home. And Lot, who was also very greedy, if you remember, talking about how he was very into his money, his, sure he bought a lot of very important stuff in his house, and this expensive item, and that jewelry, and this painting. So he's trying to collect stuff. Now, he didn't, what we can carry with you. So he's trying to decide, should I take this with me or take that with me? until eventually it's getting morning outside, and in the morning the city is going to be destroyed. So the angels grabbed him by the hands, and they rushed him out of the city, and because he was so busy, he couldn't decide what to take and what to leave behind, he took nothing. He got nothing. He ran with the clothing on his back, and that was it. Two angels holding his hands, he couldn't take anything with him. Now, as they're leaving, it says in the Torah that the angel said, do not look behind you. Why could they not look back? Why can't they look back? Simply because you're going to see the destruction of God happening when the city is destroyed, and they didn't really deserve to be saved. They were saved in the merit of Abraham, the merit of Abraham. So, as you're escaping, it's not fair for you to go look back and see the people that are being destroyed when you're not worthy. You're not really, deserving of being saved. So we weren't allowed to look back. But what happens? They hear the destruction behind them. Whatever. I'm sure it was noisy as the sulfur and the rain was pouring on the city. So the city was turned upside down. So Iris turns back to see what's happening. And when she turns back, she's turned into a pillar of salt. Salt. Why does she turn back? So simply, she turned back because her two daughters were there. That's the kind explanation.
Because why?
Her daughters, she left behind two daughters. That's the kind explanation. The other explanation, she couldn't let go. Even as they were running, her heart was still there. So she was running because the angels were taking her. But she proved by turning back, she proved she was not able to be redeemed and to move past the evil of Sodom. Her heart was there, and so she remained there. But why salt? If she doesn't deserve to be saved, if she ruined the chance of redemption by gazing at the destruction, so why salt? Why not just poof, disappear into, I don't know, yes. So the simple answer given is that Hashem punishes midah keneged midah. Measure for measure. God punishes, not just He punishes. When He punishes, it's measure for measure. The way you sinned, that's the way you get punished. So how did she sin? How did she cause that the people knew that Lot had visitors in his home? Because I said earlier tonight, she went around saying, my husband, Baham guess I don't have salt, they borrowed some salt. So therefore she turned into salt. But of course, there's a deeper message for us. And it's actually, in 2 minutes, you're going to get a bonus. We'll get a life lesson from the story of Iris turning into salt, which is, what does salt do? What is salt used for? Flavor. But you have a lot of things that are used for flavoring. Preservative. Correct. Salt is a preservative. Salt preserves. When you want to keep something for months, years, whatever, today they have all kinds of chemicals that keep it forever. But back in the good old days, pre-chemical days, the way you preserved food, you put it in salt. Salt is a preservative. That's why it says that the covenant is with salt, and every offering has salt, because bris melach olam, it's an eternal covenant, because salt is forever, it's a preservative. So when she turned around and showed she couldn't let go of Sodom, what was her punishment? What did she become? Salt. Because salt is something that doesn't let go. Salt is a preservative. Salt is also highly bitter. Why is it bitter? Salt brings out the flavor of whatever you're eating. But if you put salt on watermelon, it'll be sweet. I mean, the salt itself is not bitter. Salt brings out the straight flavor of something much, much stronger. Meaning, when you don't let go of something, and you're holding on to it, and you're holding on to it, and you're holding on to it, whatever the anger is, whatever the hurt is, whatever it is that you're holding on to in your heart that you're angry about. So-and-so says something. So if you just let it, whatever, they said it hurt, now you move on, it hurt, and you move on. But when you don't move on, and you're holding on to it, now you're bringing out the flavor more and more and more and more, so it stings more and more and more and more, because you're preserving it. You're holding it, you're keeping it fresh right in your heart, that it can't just eventually decay and move on. So because she couldn't let go of her past, and she turned around to see her past, to see what was behind her, instead of moving forward, therefore she turned into salt, which is a preservative. She was preserved, she was forever in the sins of her past and unable to move forward into the future. Hence the salt. And that's an obviously very beautiful life lesson for us, just to finish it off and I'll take questions. Very important life lesson for us is not to hold on, not to be like Iris. Iris is a terrible life, it's a life lesson for us, because many of us have this problem. We hold on to things that we regurgitate in our mind over and over and over, the Instead of just letting go, and so we keep on putting more salt on the wound, and more salt, and more salt, and you're preserving it. You're preserving it, like Iris who couldn't move on. Yes. Now questions.
Is that where the Dead Sea is?
Yes. There is a theory. There's a not a statue. There's like a monument. Not a monument. It's like it's a natural pillar. There you go. Thank you. There's a pillar by the Dead Sea that many people claim. I don't know if it's for sure, but it's definitely it's a fairly authentic theory that pillar is the pillar of Lot's wife, Iris. Yeah. Yeah. So the Dead Sea is the most saltiest place in the whole world. Nothing can live in the Dead Sea. So the theory is this is our belief that this is where it says God overturned the city, meaning that's what's also so low. I don't know how much below sea level it is, very below sea level, because God took the land that was there and turned it upside down and brought down the rain upon it sulfur, which is also salty, and that's what's today, the Dead Sea. Where till today nothing can grow on the place that was once the most fertile, luscious land in the entire land of Israel. Yeah, question.
So you have two daughters that died in there they were married. You had the daughter that was burned alive, and he had two other daughters that slept with.
Yes.
He had five?
5 daughters that I know of. 5 daughters. The 2 daughters that came out one was the mother of Ammon and one was the mother of Moab.
So where are the other cities? Sodom is the big one, but
Boacha Tzoar, Stom, Gemara, Stom, Amora, Boacha, Tzoar, and I missed one. It's in the Chumash.
they're all just next to each other?
What?
They're all just next to each
Yeah,
other?
it was a region, and none of them exist today. All those cities were destroyed. There were 5 cities.
I know, that's why I'm asking where they were.
That area where the Dead Sea is, that area.
So 5 cities were destroyed?
Yeah. Well, no. So actually, I take it back.
Why
The
did they
5th
say
city,
Sodom
which was
down the
Tzorah,
line?
was saved because Lot escaped over there. What?
Whenever there's Sodom, it always usually comes together. Sodom down the line, Sodom down the
Right.
line. I never knew there were.
There were 5. If you look in the Chumash, I don't have Chumash in front of me, but if you look in the Chumash,
No, but I get it, but there was something specific about Amorah.
no, the main city is Sodom. That was the city where Lot lived, but no,
Because you always hear Sodom and Gomorrah. You never
Yeah.
hear about the other 3.
that's true. That's what she's asking. I don't know. In the Talmud, no, we just talk about Sodom really. We don't want to talk about Sodom. I know it's people Sodom and Gemara. First of all, in Hebrew it's Amorah, not Gemara.
Amorah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm saying in English it's Sodom and Gemara. What?
Sodom and Amorah, something is worse. He said, wow, it's like Sodom and Amorah.
Yeah, because they were wicked. They were wicked. Okay. Yes, question. What about it?
You mentioned that Mashiach is going to derive from his family.
Yes, from Moab. Because Ruth is not for tonight's class. It's really a full class of its own. And I've given it to class. It's a full hour. It's a full hour. One day. But Ruth is a descendant of Moab. And Moab and Ruth is going to be the great-great-grandmother of King David, who was the great-great-grandfather of Mashiach. So why Mashiach comes from this kind of lineage? It's not just this lineage. You have Yehuda and Tamar. You have other stories too. It's another story. It's not tonight's character.
Did Lot
not
go
tonight's
back
character.
to, did
What?
Lot go back to Abraham?
Say again?
Did Lot go back to Abraham?
No, he went to hide in the cave. He thought the whole world was destroyed. He was afraid to go back to Avram because I think someone said when Lot thought in his mind that when I'm living here with the wicked people, I was worthy to be saved because compared to them, I'm righteous. But next to Avram, I'm a sinner, so I don't want to.
So he just went somewhere else?
He hid in a cave. He went to a cave. First, he went to the city of Tzor, and then after he was there, he thought that city would also be destroyed. So he went to a cave, and they thought that they legitimately thought that the whole world had been destroyed, just like the flood. They were the only ones alive, and that's why they felt this need to have children with their father to keep humanity going. Yeah. So Lot's daughters are also interesting because there's 2 daughters, and one is much more vocal about her incest. She calls her child Moab, which literally means Me'av, from my father. And the other one says Amo, which means my nation. Ami is my nation. So saying that this child is from my nation is much more ambiguous than saying this child is from my father. Yeah, but so 2 different girls with 2 different standards of.
So many imaginary like problems.
Well, in the beginning of time, everyone's intermarried in the beginning. Also, the Jews also. So Sarah is Avram's niece, and Rivka marries Yitzchak, their cousins. Okay. We're good? Any other questions? Anyone online have any questions? What does it say online over here? Nice poem, beautiful poem, lovely. She didn't offer salt to the angels. That's true. She wasn't looking to give them salt. She was just looking for it to get away. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, Bruce. Okay. Yes, we call it a night? Laila Tov. Next week, same time, same place. Again, it's not flies on the table. Starting next week, outsmarting anti-Semitism, and we're doing it Wednesday as well, God willing. Next Tuesday night. Not tomorrow, next week. Next week, outsmarting anti-Semitism. I'm going to give out some flyers right now.